It's a money fight, I get you. You want to make money. But at some point in time, if you keep telling us that you're taking boxing seriously and you want to be recognized as a big-time boxer/fighter, you're going to have to fight somebody closer to your age who is a contender at the very least.
Full fight announcement, another circus act, another clown show. A fight between Jake Paul and Gervonta Tank Davis has been announced as an exhibition fight.
A fight that I couldn't believe, that was too insane and honestly just baffling to think would be a real fight in 2025. Reminds you that combat sports are the craziest sports on the planet.
Stephen A. Smith didn't hold back when reacting to the announcement of Jake Paul versus Gervonta Davis, labeling it a complete circus. While he admitted Jake Paul has mastered self-promotion and the ability to turn fights into spectacles, Smith stressed that boxing deserves far better. He argued Paul should focus on opponents that make sense competitively, not just for shock value, insisting this matchup prioritizes entertainment over authentic, meaningful competition inside the ring.
Always been a fan of Jake because I think that what Jake tries to do for the sport of boxing, I think people don't realize the importance of him being able to promote for himself and not being reliant on the promoters who I believe has held the sport hostage. The only critique I've ever given Jake, I just want Jake to fight boxers. Like Nate Diaz, we know his reputation, we know the man can fight, we know in the octagon he could be something special. Well, we know you breathe on him, he starts bleeding.
It's a fair critique, and you know what? He should fight boxers. But then again, should he? Because I tell you what, if you're raking $6 to $10 million fighting people that you know you're going to beat, and you want to build a resume and a record that's impressive, a good highlight reel, you got to be strategic about this shit. Jake's 25, 26, he's got so much time.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I get where you coming from. All I'm saying is, we don't know your skill set because you haven't been in there with anybody really skilled.
Analysts argue Jake Paul's newest matchup is yet another circus act in his boxing career. They believe most of his fights lack genuine logic or competitive balance, often designed more for attention than sporting legitimacy. Rather than testing himself against opponents who make sense stylistically or within his weight class, Paul consistently opts for unusual choices. To many experts, this pattern makes his bouts entertaining spectacles, but far from being viewed as true boxing contests.
Performance. Jake Paul won the fight. But yeah, that was that. This time, Jake Paul is to take on Tank Davis. Tank Davis, he was recently in the news for being arrested for a domestic violence incident involving one of his kids' mother. He was alleged to have slapped her about the place. The charges were later dropped, to be fair to him. But yeah, that was when he was last in the news. What is interesting is just a couple of months ago, Tank Davis was saying openly that he lost his passion for boxing and that he wanted time away from the sport. There was speculation that he might even retire as he was experiencing extreme mental fatigue from boxing, depression, and there were mental health concerns over it. However, I guess the opportunity to earn a truck full of money fighting a completely worthless exhibition fight against Jake Paul was enough to make him change his mind about boxing. Funny that, isn't it? But you know what, I'm not even going to waste your time or mine critiquing this utter nonsense. Suffice to say that this so-called fight we're talking about is an exhibition, and it pits Jake Paul, who is a cruiserweight, by the way, weighs in excess of 200 pounds, and Tank Davis, who is, he was the WBA lightweight champion, who weighs in at about 135 pounds when he fights. So that's a disparity of some 65 pounds. In old money, that's about 4.5 stone. There's also a significant difference in height. Jake Paul is roughly, 6'1", 2". Gervonta Davis is 5'5" at best. So, there's a height disparity there of some 8 inches.
Ring Magazine sent shockwaves to the boxing world with a tweet announcing that Jake Paul will face Gervonta Tank Davis on November 14th at State Farm Arena in Atlanta. The bout, confirmed by Mike Carpenter, will be an exhibition streamed live on Netflix. Talks for Paul to fight Anthony Joshua reportedly collapsed over network issues, paving the way for this unexpected clash. The matchup immediately sparked debate, as Paul last fought at 200 pounds, while Davis is a dominant champion at 135. Fans are questioning the size difference, competitive value, and whether this is sport or spectacle. Still, Paul has been relentless in pushing his own agenda, investing his own money to chase unconventional goals and generate massive buzz. His approach, though unorthodox, has undeniably shaken up boxing, attracting new audiences and media attention. While critics dismiss the fight as another circus act, supporters argue Paul's disruptive influence is drawing eyes to boxing in ways few imagined possible.
And if it makes dollars, it makes sense. And we've seen that Jake will kind of bounce in between doing these entertainment fights and then, trying to push toward his goal of ingraining himself in the sport of boxing, and kind of does both of them. So it's kind of a weird place to be, because he wants the respect of the boxing fans and the boxing hierarchy and hardcore boxing people, but at the same time he'll gain some of that and then lose some of it. It's like a seesaw of his fights. Like one fight, like, okay, that's a real fight, or that's a real fighter. He'll go and he'll win the fight. Julio Cesar Chavez, real fighter, maybe past his prime, whatever, but Jake goes and wins that fight pretty easily, and then gets a lot of respect, gets a lot of the boxing hardcore love. And you have these talks about him fighting Anthony Joshua, and that was going to get even more respect. More people were like, that's fucking crazy. What are you doing? Myself included. That seemed like a massive risk, but a lot of people were like, okay, fair play. Anthony Joshua, that's a real heavyweight. Jake wants to fight him. He's a psycho, but fair play. And then you announce this one, and it's like, well, that's the same thing people have been saying about Jake for years, so it's a weird spot to be in for him, for sure. But I talked about this not being the first choice, and I don't think it was, because Coppinger reports next that talks for Jake Paul to face Anthony Joshua collapsed over network issues. Now, we had all heard the talks, and they were pretty public, from Eddie Hearn, from Jake. Nikisa Badarian, Jake's manager, was over in the UK on, I think, Sky Sports, talking about the fight and saying how it was a real possibility and they were really starting to work on it. And now Mike Coppinger says that the talks for Jake and Joshua fell apart over broadcasting.
Jake Paul later confirmed the fight himself through Instagram, posting, size versus speed, power versus precision. One will rise and one will fall from Atlanta. Live globally only on Netflix. Friday, November 14th. Astrus's announcement instantly fueled even greater excitement, turning the exhibition into a global talking point across social media and boxing circles. Among those weighing in was legendary trainer and commentator Teddy Atlas, who offered measured perspective on Paul's rise. Atlas acknowledged that, regardless of how critics feel, Jake deserves credit for consistently securing the fights he wants. He stressed that this doesn't happen by accident. It requires persistence, financial investment, and a willingness to sacrifice stability for the spotlight. According to Atlas, Paul has carved out a lane in boxing that no one imagined possible for a YouTuber-turned-fighter. Importantly, Atlas also emphasized Paul's genuine progress as a boxer. Over the years, Paul has worked with elite coaches, sparred top-level professionals, and learned to hold his own inside the ring. While boxing purists often dismiss him because of his background, Atlas argued that much of the criticism ignores the effort, discipline, and results Paul has already shown. For Atlas, Paul's journey itself proves how deeply he has invested to reach this moment.
That I gave too much credit to Paul. Why? He's done a hell of a job to put himself in this position. He sold himself. He sold his dream. He took his dream. He took his idea, and he put it out there, and he made it happen. Give him credit for that. He made it happen, and he took risk along the way. Yeah, he picked his spots. He's in the driver's seat. He gets to pick his spots. He's the one bringing the money. He's the one promoting. Yeah, he's the name. He made himself that, coming from where he came from, with all his followers and the whole thing, and just, just the uniqueness of what he was doing. But he has learned along the way. He's not a top guy yet. No, I know that he ever will be. He didn't have that amateur background and the things that you usually need to be a top guy. But he has improved. He is a work in progress. He is a guy that you got to give him credit that he's respected the sport. He went out there, he's worked hard at it, and he's gotten himself into this position. Having said all of that, this might be a step too far. Now, when I say it, I'm also I try to be responsible. I've been in this game 50 years, so I know where not to step. Where you could twist an ankle, or worse, you could break a leg or fall down. When I say that with the understanding too that Joshua's coming off being knocked out.
The team at Talk Sports had a strong reaction to the announcement of Jake Paul versus Gervonta Davis, calling it a completely unbalanced matchup. Their biggest concern centers on the drastic weight disparity. Davis, a natural lightweight at 135 pounds, has built his reputation on knockout power and dominance in his division. However, stepping into the ring against Jake Paul, who typically walks around at 195 pounds, strikes him as highly unrealistic. They question how such a fight could ever be considered fair or meaningful with such an extreme size difference. This response reflected familiar criticism of Paul's matchmaking choices. Many believe he targets opponents who are either smaller, past their prime, or from outside boxing. In Davis's case, though elite, he's undersized.
And that's probably where the problem was. So I think that fight is sort of like dead and buried in the water. And we get Gervonta Davis, man, like you guys said it. He's a 135-pound world champion, lightweight world champion. The guy's my height. He's 5'5", and Jake Paul is a cruiserweight. You know, he walks around at sort of like 15 stone. So, and it's an exhibition. So look, if you buy into that, then yeah, fine. But it's not one for me.
Spence, let me ask you this: if you were European champion, right?
Yes.
Before you had to retire, so that you were European champion. If you were, how tall are you? What are you at? 4'8", 4'9"?
5'5".
5'5". Okay. If you were in your pomp at European champion and you were 5'5" and you were fighting Jake Paul, would you fancy your chances?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, definitely. I think I fancy my chances. I think Gervonta Davis actually beats him as well. He's one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world at lightweight. But it's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? It's like you got a guy of 5'5" boxing a guy of 6 foot plus. Cruiserweight, yeah, it's just all a little bit odd. I feel if they're going to do an exhibition, perhaps Jake should have picked someone more his size. Look, his last fight against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Was at cruiserweight. Chavez Jr. was a former world champion at middleweight himself, and that sort of made sense. And it was a good win for Jake Paul. You know, he come out there and he beats an ex-world champion. He gets a little bit of credibility, and you go, right, now you're heading in the right direction.
Analysts from Boxing Scene weighed in, arguing that the fight offers little upside for Gervonta Davis. Though smaller in size, Davis holds an undefeated record and is renowned for his devastating knockout power. Yet facing a much larger opponent presents serious risks. If Davis loses, critics will dismiss it as a mismatch where size was a deciding factor. Even if he wins, detractors may still claim Jake Paul was never an elite boxer, minimizing the significance of Davis's
win-win for Gervonta as much as it is for Jake. Jake, it's like, okay, you're fighting a former world lightweight champion. You're bigger, so you have some advantages, even if you're at a severe skill disadvantage. You're not supposed to expect to do anything, but if you do, it's even, it's bananas for you. It's great. Gervonta, I don't know, what if Jake hits him? Jake's a big guy. I don't know if Gervonta stood next to Jake. Jake's a big guy.
Yeah, he's a big dude.
And Gervonta is small even by lightweight standards.
Right.
So it is a little bit of a David and Goliath fight. It's just, the David character in Gervonta is much, much more skilled. But I guess that's the thought process. As far as what it does for boxing, well, absolutely nothing. But then again, what have Gervonta Davis and Jake Paul really done for boxing in the ring aspect? Because Jake, I am a believer in Jake as a promoter, and I think that he has a future as a promoter, and I think he's done very well as a promoter, and I think his company has done some very good things for the sport, and for young fighters, and for brewing talent and making good fights on that basis. But as far as from fighters' perspective, what do they do for boxing? I don't think Gervonta Davis has ever done anything for boxing, honestly. Like I feel like TV has just in this generation, they just create stars, and then they just tell you, okay, we're gonna make this guy the star. It's like they're pre-created, and then they just tell you.
Critics argue Jake Paul's influence in boxing is driven less by merit and rankings and more by financial power. Analysts note that his wealth and promotional reach allow him to dictate matchups, regardless of whether they align with the sport's traditions. His ability to secure bouts with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. and now Gervonta Davis highlights the control he holds. For many traditional fans, these fights resemble entertainment spectacles rather than legitimate contests. Some view this influence as harmful to boxing's integrity, since the usual matchmaking process, based on weight classes and rankings, is often bypassed in favor of spectacle.
Here we go again, people. Another Jake Paul fight, another embarrassing night for boxing. I've said this a few times now, and I'm really getting sick of it. 10 rounds of tediousness, whereby Jake Paul was just, I say throwing punches, a lot of them didn't have any zip on them, against an opponent that was just compliant. He holds boxing in contempt. He's basically pimping the sport. That's what Jake Paul is doing. And I find it unacceptable, I really do. The whole Jake Paul brand is actually bad for boxing. Taking advantage of the sport, pimping the sport, fighting washed up MMA fighters, former fighters, and now we're hearing that he's about to enter the WBA rankings and could be in line for a world title shot. Absolute farce. He couldn't get away with it in any other sport, and that's what makes me so mad.
Former world champion Carl Froch didn't hold back, blasting the situation as an absolute joke. Froch revealed that talks for a Jake Paul versus Anthony Joshua fight were nearly finalized, with the deal reportedly 99% complete. Instead of stepping up against a heavyweight giant like Joshua, Paul shifted to facing Gervonta Davis, a fighter nearly half his size. Froch called the decision baffling, viewing it as further proof that Paul chases shock value rather than true competition. His comments reflect what many insiders believe. Paul deliberately chooses opponents for publicity and lower risk. While Joshua would oppose a monumental test, Davis creates more of a spectacle than a genuine contest.
Jake Paul's supposed to be fighting AJ. Eddie Hearn announced 99% done, which we just spoke about. What next for AJ? Potentially Jake Paul. But it now looks like that Jake Paul is fighting one of Anthony Joshua's legs. He's fighting Gervonta Davis, somebody who's a quarter of his size. I don't even know what's going on. Has Eddie Hearn been played? Let me know what you think. But the AJ fight with Jake Paul's finished. Gervonta Davis, fake Paul, November. I don't know what's going on in the world of boxing. This is an absolute joke. What next for AJ? We'll get into this, and there's so many questions I want to get into.
Former two-division world champion and boxing analyst Paulie Malignaggi admitted he never expected this matchup. The announcement, he said, came out of left field and stunned much of the boxing world. While Jake Paul has built a reputation for taking on unusual opponents, pairing him with a lightweight like Gervonta Davis still caught Malignaggi off guard. He described it as a shocking, unpredictable move that highlights just how far Paul is willing to push matchmaking boundaries.
That been being talked about even prior to the Roach fight. I thought it was so utterly ridiculous, especially that you've essentially manufactured Gervonta into a star without really having him fight any major threats in his career. I know the groupies are gonna say somebody like saying, well, if Leo Santa Cruz is the biggest name on your resume, you got a problem. So Santa Cruz was probably dying shot by the time he fought Gervonta Davis. Santa Cruz, who 90% of his own resume was against guys he never heard of, and again, it was a one-directional fighter who started at bantamweight and they fought at 130. That's your best win. Pedraza's a solid win, I thought, even though it was a weight-drained Pedraza, and Pedraza was so weight-drained that he actually already lost to Cherry. He should have already not been champion by the time Gervonta fought him, but they robbed Cherry in that IBF title defense of Jose Pedraza, so that Pedraza remained champion. I remember because I worked that show and commentated that fight. So it's a sneaky good win, but it's sort of below the radar, not that good of a win. Weight-drained Pedraza went up to lightweight and actually fought better once he didn't have to weight-drain himself, and who had been struggling already at 130 prior to being knocked out by Davis. Like I said, he'd already lost to Cherry and was lucky to keep the title in the Cherry fight at 130. So Cherry, mind you, a guy that I beat way back in the day. I don't know. It's I beat him easily. 9 out of 10 rounds, 10 out of 10 rounds, something like that. I don't know. I really don't know what to make of this, man. I sure as hell love to hear the comments. It's gonna generate curiosity for sure. Jake Paul is huge. I mean, this is he's gonna be almost a foot bigger than Gervonta Davis. This is an exhibition, so there's not gonna be an official win unless it's a stoppage. So things like glove size, ring size still has to be dictated and figured out. I don't know. I don't know what you do with this. I don't know what boxing's coming to. This is what happens when you manufacture a star instead of letting stars organically create themselves.
UFC legend and analyst Daniel Cormier offered a different perspective on Jake Paul's latest move. He noted that Paul's fight with Mike Tyson on Netflix broke the internet, setting a new standard for crossover events in combat sports. Now, with the Gervonta Davis fight also landing on Netflix, Paul is once again proving his ability to create spectacles that reach far beyond boxing's traditional audience. For Cormier, this makes Jake an important figure, whether fans want to admit it or not. He argued that Paul is better than most critics give him credit for, highlighting his serious training, willingness to take risks, and consistent drive to raise the stakes. While many dismiss him as nothing more than a social media celebrity, Cormier believes Paul's growing skill set and promotional power deserve recognition. Agree or disagree, Paul has undeniably shifted the conversation around boxing, and Cormier sees that disruption itself as a form of success.
Twice, big numbers. Jake Paul fought against Tommy Fury, big numbers. Jake Paul, who I believe, and I have told you guys this time and time again, he's much better than people give him credit for. One, Jake Paul is not an amateur fighter, like some try to say. Jake Paul has money, so Jake Paul is getting trained by the best boxing coaches that money can buy. He's full-time boxing. There are a lot of people that say he may do some other stuff. I don't know who he was going to fight that was saying that he was juiced up and he was ignoring him. Or was it Logan Paul? One of them. But at the end of the day, this kid's training to be the best fighter in the world, or the best as he can be, and he understands what losing would do to the perception of who he is in fighting. We were yelling so much about him fighting someone. Fight somebody your size. Fight somebody, a real boxer. Stop fighting MMA guys. There were so many things that people were mad about in regards to his level of competition and the people he was competing against. Well, today we learned that Jake Paul has his next opponent. His next opponent is by far the most credentialed guy actively. Many don't want to jump down my throat and say, oh, Mike Tyson is actively.
That's it for today's video. Stay tuned until next time.
That wraps up today's video. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more updates, analysis, and big boxing news ahead.